Welcome to the Art&Logic Minimum Viable Podcast. Today we'll be talking with Juan Torres, Senior Director of Business Development at Prism. Hey Juan, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. And we'll also be joined today by Andrew. Nice to have you with us again. Andrew, how are you?
Thanks, Carlos. It's great to be here. I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Cool. Well, Juan, let's get started with a little bit about you and the Prism. So what kind of work does Prism do?
So Prism works with music venues, concert promoters, and now music agents, talent agents. And our goal is really to help those entities be more efficient in putting on live events. And so we work with them with everything from managing a calendar and putting dates on a calendar for potential concerts, all the way through offers, contracts, and financial settlements for all the shows that they put on, and ultimately trying to reduce redundancies that both parties spend a lot of time in and help them be more efficient.
So is this the kind of business that existed prior to the pandemic and then kind of had to pivot a lot during the pandemic and is now readjusting to the new normal, or
It's
how
really
would you?
interesting. We've been around for about 7 years, and we started out primarily helping and working with promoters and music venues. And our CEO and founder, Matt Ford, is a former promoter himself and was putting on some concerts, decided that there had to be a better way than Excel to manage calendars and to manage financial offers and settlements for, all the concerts that even one promoter puts on a year. Through the pandemic, we actually ended up seeing an efficiency gain and a net gain in business for us because after the initial shock of 3 months and we haven't put on a show, a lot of venues and promoters started to think, okay, what can I do in these next 3 to 6 months to be more efficient when shows do come back on? And we really leaned into that through the pandemic to reach out to people and just say, look, this is a great opportunity to not have idle hands and to look at how you can be more efficient. So through the pandemic, we stayed true to our core of what we do. We did a slight pivot in a sense that we also rolled out the agency software at that time while there were no shows happening. And one of the interesting things about that is generally or historically, the industry has seen a lot of consolidation. So you always hear about Live Nation or AEG buying a venue or a promoter. With the pandemic, a lot of agents left big agencies. And so this was an opportunity for them to look at how they create efficiencies in their small businesses. And so that empowered us to really go out and roll out that software as well. So now, 2 years later, we've got the two systems running side by side.
We had a chance to talk to you about this a little bit at Music Tectonics, the conference recently down
Yeah.
in Santa Monica. I remember the business case for all of the parties involved was really compelling. As you say, greater efficiency. It sounds like actually being able to get paid the amount that was agreed, that sort of thing. A lot of things really come out of this that wouldn't have been possible with just a spreadsheet-based approach, yeah?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The industry has obviously existed before we came along, and we have promoters that have been doing this way back from the Billy Graham days, and there are even more before that. And counts and tickets and everything was kept track of on a legal pad, and artists were paid in a duffel bag full of money. After the dot com in the 90s and the early 2000s, now there's a new generation of folks that are putting on these concerts, and they all learned how to do it a certain way, but that way involves a lot of spreadsheets. Every one concert that happens, just from the venue and the promoter side, might have at least 3 or 4 different spreadsheets that have to be created just so that the offer can be generated for the artist, and then the internal teams know what's going on for the show, and then that show can be settled at the end of the night. And then as a business group, the promoter or venue can actually close out and settle that show. And when you add in ticket counts and revenue streams that come in, expenses that are going out, it's a lot on a spreadsheet. And there's a lot that can happen and go wrong if someone sort of fat fingers a
Yeah.
cell and all of a sudden deletes a formula. And it's something that's very difficult for folks to manage and remain consistent. So we try to take that out of Excel, try and reduce the human error that exists in working in spreadsheets so that everybody can work in a system, have a common language as well. And so that way the formulas aren't someone's spreadsheet formula, but it's an
Hmm.
industry standard, which is what we're working to build.
And the settlement time frame, I think you said, could drop from weeks potentially down to hours, right? When,
Yeah.
the live act and the venue are all trying to come to terms with the numbers that may not match up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've seen, in my time with Prism, there's some promoter groups that would say that if they really wanted to be efficient, they would start settling the show the day before. So sort of doing a
Right.
pre-settlement, and then just wrap up everything that happens day of the show so that they could settle quickly. That's still, the day before still involves a 24-hour prep for everything going on the next night. Multiply that by a Friday show, a Saturday show, and then a Wednesday, Thursday show next week. You're also doing other things in that time frame instead of just settling the show tomorrow.
I
And
see.
so that settlement process has, taken some folks 24 hours, 2 days, a week. And now with our system, really from the time the show is confirmed, the settlement is already happening because of the system that we have. And so settlement is pretty much done once the last ticket is sold. And teams can settle their shows in a matter of minutes instead of hours or days.
And this kind of solution, it can apply to venues of all sizes, right? This isn't just for like huge arenas. It can also be smaller concert venues like bars or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. We have a wide range of clients. Our what I would consider smallest capacity client is a room here in Austin called Hole in the Wall, which is considered a local dive bar, but they put
I've
on
been there.
shows. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great
and
place.
whether it's ticketed or non-ticketed, they have a calendar of events that they'd like to manage. And they like to understand how profitable the night is when there is a band in the room or when there is an artist in the room. And so that's on the very small level. And then we have performing arts centers and arenas that are also using Prism. And we have performing arts groups like the Paps Theater Group, the Dayton Live Group in Ohio, or promoter groups like the IMP concerts with 930 Club and Merriweather Post Pavilion
Hmm.
that are using Prism for the thousands of events a year that they're doing. And it really, it scales all the way from that small a team to large teams because the core problems are the same. You are booking shows today for 3, 6, 1 year out, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year out, but you're also settling a show tonight and you also have shows going on next week. So there's this life cycle of an event that is seemingly never ending because there are 30 to 40 shows in the middle of that life cycle at all times.
Neat. That's my stomping ground. I used to see shows at Merriweather and 930
Oh
Club.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a group that very intelligent operating group. They're very smart with how they look at things and through the pandemic they were looking on ways to be more efficient. They had actually built a system internally that helped them analyze their past show data, but they had
Hmm.
nothing in place to help them be more efficient with current shows. And we really helped them bridge that gap. And if we can help them be more efficient and book even one more show, they're net profitable as far as return on investment goes with Prism. So it's been really fun to work with them.
So, how much of the process, like if somebody has to incorporate some past show data, is that something that has to? I mean, I imagine that can be a rather painstaking manual process. Um, yeah, but I think what's happening in my head is that when you're describing spreadsheets, I'm still flashing back to when I was young and going to different venues and they were small, and you'd literally see somebody standing there with like a spreadsheet in their hand, not
Hmm.
necessarily a spreadsheet on a
Yeah.
computer. So what how tricky is it to convince people to go from their proprietary system to something
Hmm.
like what you offer?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you would ask me that question last year or even 2 years ago, I would say it's very tricky to convince somebody to do it. But sitting here today, even since we saw each other in Santa Monica during Music Tectonics, it's a lot easier. And the reason is that a lot of people one, know friends who are using it and that it's worked for. So word of mouth is our best marketing tool. But the other part of it is that there's more propensity to move things onto some sort of technology platform. There has just been the idea that no one's going to develop something for concerts because it's so niche. And it took, a whole bunch of concert passionate people to do it. And, it's going back to your earlier question about a pandemic pivot. It's why we really couldn't pivot to anything else because our software is very much live event, venue promoter, agency. You can't use our system for, anything else that isn't live events. So it's both a gift and a curse, but it allows us to really go deep into the space, expand into agencies, and eventually into other facets of the live industry.
Given the very narrow focus, though, it still seems pretty impressive that you guys are able to present software that scales to the degree you said, that it can be used by a small, 100-person venue and then by tens of thousands of people, arenas, and it's still a feature set that's relevant to them and that's accessible to all of them and, well, scalable. Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's 7 years in the making, and I would say for the first 3.5, it was slow going, and that was convincing people that it could be done, actually doing it. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on too is that we really poke and prod our clients and try and understand what's new, what's changing, what can we develop, and we have an in-house engineering team that is rolling out new updates and features almost weekly, honestly. And so when the industry changes because of the economy and the deal structures are changing, we're able to pivot with the industry very quickly. And so, in some cases, what it would take someone to update their internal spreadsheets and proprietary system is more time than what it would take us to update that same thing because we've got a team of 14, 15 people working on it, and that's all they're working on, as opposed to also working on the shows themselves.
If I can follow up, we were actually curious about part of that in particular, about how you get that information from your user base. How do you, keep your finger on the pulse of what's necessary for them, what's changing? What does that look like?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways we do it. I actually, personally, in my role, work on bringing on new clients. I oversee the team that does that. But I also have a list of clients that I talk to pretty regularly. So we have a list of clients that our CEO and founder talks to pretty regularly. And we do a really good job of cycling through that list, building relationships with folks, and really asking them, is there anything that the system could be doing better? Leaning into that feedback as opposed to shying away and worrying that someone has a criticism of the platform that we've worked so hard on building. We realized early on that the only way that we can stay cutting edge and be leaders in the space is to actually get that feedback and criticism so that we can be better. And we have a very, great way internally of documenting this feedback that we get. We sort of let it build up and find out what do we have to tackle first, and then follow up with clients and prospects as well to see if we built this, what would it do for your business? What's the net gain here? Should we make this part of the core offering for everyone, or should we build this as an add-on feature that only certain folks are going to want to add? Because we don't want to make a system that is so bulky that hole in the wall says there's no way I would use all of these things. And so we have a system that scales for every team, and it allows us to, work with all size teams because we do it that way.
So this is going to sound a little bit simplistic, but I'm just kind of curious about the type of information that goes into these spreadsheets and then that gets, input into Prism.
Yeah, well, if we bring them on a Prism, then it doesn't go in a spreadsheet anymore ever again. Yeah, I mean, every one of our clients has sort of like an independent database. So there is no data sharing as to what another venue did somewhere versus what they're doing, which is very important for the industry because you really want to make sure that that data privacy is secure. But folks are entering everything from here's a potential concert or band that I might be able to book on a calendar, all the way through, here's the deal that I am offering, Lizzo through their agent, and here are the potential dates. Here's what we're, saying we're paying for towels and cleanup and security and really all of the cost offerings that go into a show, as well as here are the rebates that are tied to ticketing and the fees. Because ultimately, at the end of every concert, there has to be an accounting settlement that happens. And a lot of these deals for artists, the majority of them are versus deals where someone is getting paid a guarantee or they're getting paid, a percentage of the net profits. And so they're at least hedging their bet on some of the concert performance, but it's really in the best interest of the venue promoter and the artist for them to outperform a break even, and they all make money in that case.
I have a question then. This is sort of
Yeah.
it's marginally off topic, but it's also about what we're discussing here. So we met you at a music technology conference, right? Music Tectonics. And when we were talking about interviewing you today, Andrew and I discussed briefly like what music technology is, because in many respects, what Prism does falls into a category of music technology. And from our experience as a software development firm, like I think, tend to see music technology slightly differently. Wouldn't you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, I think I would think of it mostly as, excuse me, technology that assists in the creation or reproduction of music. But that may not be complete.
Yeah, but that's what I think is so fascinating is that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think I see where you're going. It's one of the things that, not to assume too much or jump ahead, but a lot of times when I also think of music technology, and a lot of the conferences that we go to, and there's talk about music technology, it ends up being a conversation about the music technology. What are the synthesizers that are out there? What are the instruments that are out there? What are the ways to get your music out there? What are the ways, for the live experience to be
Right.
enjoyed, as opposed to what's happening behind the scenes to make it happen? And it's really the gap that we saw when Prism got started, right? Is that, for all the years that concerts have been putting on, for all the rise of .com and technologies, here we were in 2016, 2015, and there still wasn't anything to help the process of booking a concert be more efficient. And folks were on Google Calendar or iCal and spreadsheets. The most advanced team was using FileMaker through Microsoft, which was about to be sunset by Microsoft. So,
Yeah.
and so there was an opportunity to help people think about, how can they be more efficient with shows. And it's interesting, when we work with promoter teams and venue teams, um, the only other tech that they're used to using is ticketing, and maybe a POS system. And so they're also now thinking about music tech in a sense of, how do they help the live performance come to be, and how do they help settle the shows? And that's usually where we start to break in and say, no, we're not a ticketing company. We're not a POS system. We are this back of house system that helps tie it all together. And it's a different side of music tech, something that I like to sort of refer to more as a live music tech. And with our offering expanding, I've started to see more companies pop up in that space and think, what other solutions, what other problems can we solve that work well with companies like Prism? And there were a couple companies at Music Tectonics. I think it was Real Counts that was there, that answers a real question of how do we help agents consolidate ticket counts and manage ticket counts. Again, a very manual process that requires somebody to make 50 to 100 calls a day and put a number into a spreadsheet.
Yeah. maybe slight digression. What's happened with live venues over the last couple of years? Are we seeing more, less?
Yeah, I think it's still a little early to fully tell, but prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of consolidation happening. And so you
Mm.
saw a lot of independent venues losing their leases, getting bought out. You still see it. There's some news out of Nashville recently. Austin's been struggling with some of this as well, but venues will build up a scene because they're leasing the space, and then the dirt gets sold out from under them. And now here comes a condo for a growing city, and there's no room for a music venue at the bottom of a condo. No one really wants to live above a music venue. And so you see some music venues go away that way, which is kind of sad because you think about like Brooklyn, New York is another place where the venues built the space, built the community, and now they get pushed out.
Mhm.
However, across the country, we are seeing more new venues pop up. More new venues are popping up than we're seeing close down, and more new venues are popping up than we're seeing, Live Nation or AEG buy up. So there isn't as much consolidation happening as you sort of expected coming out of the pandemic when venues were struggling. A lot of that is because of the work that NIVA, the National Independent Venue Association, did to help secure funding within the CARES Act. So the SVOG, the grants that went out, the Save Our Stages campaign that NIVA ran, that did a lot to get venues funds to stay afloat post pandemic. And then, the other side of the coin on that is, agencies were also getting consolidated into the big three, four agencies, and the pandemic created a sort of ripple where a lot of agents broke away and started their own agencies. And so on
Mm.
that side, there's a deconsolidation happening. Now, whether that reconsolidates down the road remains to be
Yeah,
seen, but I am optimistic about the number of music venues that are popping up, independent music venues that are popping up around the country.
that's exciting. And I'm
Yeah.
guessing you're seeing it supported by the fan base coming back out in droves and with some enthusiasm again.
Yeah, there's been a change. There's definitely been a shift in the fan bases. A lot of performing arts centers, for instance, used to rely on the boomer crowd. The
Mm.
50, 60 plus were constant investors in the live arts, and that crowd has sort of pulled back from some live events. They aren't going as much. And so a lot of performing arts centers have pivoted in their programming. They've pivoted in the way that they market themselves to bring in a younger crowd that is hungry for events, that is
Mm.
hungry for connecting. Live stream was okay through the pandemic, but a lot of people really wanted to be back in a room, feeling the bass, feeling the experience. And live music creates an experience that's just very hard to replicate through
Yeah,
video or any other way other than being in the room.
yeah,
And so
yeah, yeah.
we are seeing, I would say, mixed return. Some markets are doing better than others. The big thing that's kind of hurting the industry is the sophistication of scalpers and the secondary
Mm.
market, which, while it sounds good that a show might be sold out and, 1,000 capacity show might be sold out, if scalpers bought 400 of those tickets and resold 200 of them, you still have a fairly empty, relatively empty room, and that's less people buying drinks at the bar, buying merch at the merch table, and
Yeah.
so it isn't quite the boom that you would expect. But live is a new commodity that scalpers are figuring out they can flip and resell.
I think I read a blog article by you about that, about how important the actual in-show merchandising and drink sales, as you say, is, and compared to the ticket sales themselves. Use
Yeah.
the mind for what it's designed for, not storing all the stuff you could be keeping somewhere else.
Yep. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of, yeah, I'm a huge fan of writing things down.
Mm-hmm.
I was just getting grief from an agent because he was texting me, and he said he realized I wasn't on iPhone on iMessage because I use an Android my Android has a stylus, and whether I am actually going to reference the note or not, there is a proven mental connection that happens when you write something down. Doesn't matter where you
Nice.
write it down, but the connection of hearing it, processing it, and writing it helps you remember it. But if you don't remember it, you know where to reference it, and I don't have to think about these things. For that reason, I don't know that I could ever go to a mobile device without a stylus, because then I'd have to go back to carrying around a notepad everywhere, which is also a fine option, but a little bit more tech
And it's the
forward.
handwriting component that brings it into
Yeah,
the
yeah,
longer term storage rather than the typing or
yeah.
text chat or something interesting.
I can totally understand that. Well, thank you, Juan. It was really a pleasure having you join us today. And to those of you out there, thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from Art and Logic, you can find our Minimum Viable podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or anywhere you get your podcasts.